My name is Sandro Olivieri. I am the entrepreneur in residence at the AT&T Aspire Accelerator. I've been doing that for the last 5 years. And that's really been my primary entrance into education technology and taken a broad view of everything that's going on, from trends to technologies, what's going on various aspects of the industry and the markets. This conversation about empowering the parent as an educator is really pretty personal to me. For one, I am an immigrant to this country, and when I came, not really speaking English, my dad was traveling, probably 60–70% of the time, and my mom didn't really speak enough English to, see, sometimes my accent just comes right back up. My mom didn't really speak enough English to feel empowered to be involved in my schooling. She's the most supportive person I know, but she really didn't have the tools. The schools really weren't making it easy for her either. They didn't really know to or understand how to. So this topic itself is very personal to me. I have my mom in my mind when I'm talking about all this stuff. The other reason it's very personal to me is because my wife is on the panel, which makes it very personal. We've pretended that we don't work in the same industry for a while, but I don't think we could do that anymore because we're both on this stage together. So just be forewarned, we're married, so some of the dynamics might be a little interesting.
Can I change seats?
You guys all know Brian, CEO of Remind, will be on our panel. Sam Olivieri, former Chief Strategy Officer at Great Schools. We have Juan Mateos from Rocket Ship Education down in San Jose, Rocket Ship Public Schools, pardon me, and Ben York, the founder and CEO of Parent Powered. So I'm going to start off with a very simple question here, as I was thinking about what we were going to talk about. I'll offer this very basic question up first, and I'll throw this first question to Sam, and that's going to be the end of the special treatment. What does it really mean to empower a parent?
Well, I will say when we were doing our preparation for this panel, which happened on the drive to the airport yesterday, it was about a 2-minute conversation that ended in, why don't you just moderate the panel? So it's really going to go well, I think. I think it's pretty well known that the single most important factor to a child's success is her parent. And so empowering parents to support their child's education is just so critical to the success of children at the individual level and on the collective level. And so when we think about what is parent empowerment, what are all the ways in which parents do empower their child's education? I think there's 3 main aspects to that, and then different ways to sort of slice and dice it. But first is by supporting their child's learning at home, and both starting just in sort of helping build both the academics and the social emotional skills, and sort of well-rounded, creating a well-rounded child, and then as they get older, really being the continuity between their school and their home, and helping support that child's learning and creating conditions for the child to increase that academic foundation. So it's really that's just the support role. The second is through the schools that they choose. So parents express demand for schools by where they choose to send their child to school and where they move, which is in our system, the determinant of where many people go to school. And so parents make choices around what school do they feel will support and fulfill their child's needs. And the third category is as an advocate. And I don't think we talk about this one as much, but parents are in the position where they advocate for their child within their child's system, and they advocate for the need for quality schools within their community. And that takes place at a communal level, and that takes place at in the political domain as well. And so I think across these 3 areas, having empowered parents is so essential. And then I also just want to say, I know you want to get into kind of the equity angle later, but this fact how important parents are is both inspiring and it's also a bit troubling, because I think most of us are in education because at its core what we care about is social mobility, the idea that the conditions of your birth do not determine the conditions of your potential, and that education is a path to opportunity. And to the extent that we rely on parents as the channel to empower students, you actually stand to replicate and reinforce the gaps that exist in our increasingly segregated and stratified society. When you think about empowering parents, thinking about how to do this at an equitable level, I think has to be at the forefront of that conversation.
I totally agree. And yes, I was going to go and get into that later, but that's a really good precursor. At sort of system level, empowering parents to be advocates, not just for the kids, but for education in general, to improve the system system-wide, can have a massive impact. But there's also that individual parent-child interaction. Ben, at Parent Powered, you guys know a lot about this, done a lot of research around what it means to empower parents with their child individually, one-on-one. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ben. I am an educational researcher by training. Our organization, Parent Powered, has a program that we deliver to support parents digitally. And when we think about empowering parents, we start with the child in mind. Thankfully, there is compelling and growing research on what skills kids need to have to be successful in life. First, their physical needs must be met, not just food, clothing, and shelter, but healthy food, prolonged time periods for physical activity, plenty of play and downtime, and healthy sleep, body, and oral routines. Second, their emotional needs must be met. Secure attachment relationships with adults, positive self-esteem, the ability to identify and regulate emotions, just to name a few. Cognitive skills, too, of course, are important, and not just discrete literacy, numeracy, and science skills or the accumulation of knowledge of social facts, but critical thinking skills and the ability to make decisions, which are key for success throughout life. And finally, meta systems to control the whole human experience. Here, the research on executive functions is particularly exciting. Executive functions include working memory, which I clearly struggle with, cognitive flexibility, another challenge for me, and inhibitory control, what the Harvard Center on the Developing Child would call the air traffic control system for humans. So ultimately what we're talking about is whole child development. So what do parents need to support the whole child? Well, first they need time and financial resources. Financial resources are required to provide healthy foods, clothing, and shelter. And deeply engaged parenting requires a significant amount of time. Yet we know that time and financial resources are unevenly distributed, and they in and of themselves aren't enough. Parents also need information. Public awareness campaigns have done a really nice job at promoting the importance of literacy skills and saying no to drugs. But parents generally have less awareness of other critical aspects of child development, like the need for social and emotional skills. Knowledge itself isn't enough either. Parents need to put knowledge into action, which requires uptaking, practicing, and sustaining new behaviors. Parents also need emotional support, along with social connectedness and networks. Support for caring for the physical needs of their children, the teaching and learning needs of their children, and ultimately for caregiving. Parents can't nor should they be the experts on all subjects. And then finally, I would say it's also critical for parents to have free time to care for their own physical, psychological, and emotional needs. Like children need to be whole, parents also need to be whole, but it's infinitely trickier given the complexities of adult life. Therein lies the opportunity, and I think why we're certainly drawn to this work, and I would also surmise to guess why others on this panel are drawn to the work.
Yeah, and Juan, it strikes me as we're talking about, Sam is talking about parents as advocates, and lots of different levels of how parents can be empowered, but really thinking about parents as advocates. Ben is really talking about that one-to-one individual connection. You guys at Rocket Ship do a little bit of both when you work with parents. Could you talk about that strategy locally?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, so first for us, it's a slight reframing. We don't see it as empowering the parents. Like to us, like parents already have power. And believe me when I tell you, parents have power. For us, it's about unleashing that power for them. And for me, like my belief in this area really stems from an experience I had as a second grader. I was a hotshot second grader. Like I remember kind of just walking around like I knew what I needed to learn and decided I'm not going to do homework anymore. I'm done with it. Put it aside. So one day I'm in my house, feeling pretty good. Threw away some notes, made sure the answering machine answered, and deleted some phone calls. And I get a knock on the door, and I open the door, and much to my dismay, on the other side is my second grade teacher. And I remember thinking that she was there to like, I don't know, shame me and yell at my mom, but like the opposite actually happened. Like she was there to talk to my mother, and I have this vivid memory of my mom sitting on that couch with my teacher and just breaking down into tears and looking at my teacher and telling her, I'm not from this country, I don't understand this system, I don't speak the language, and I don't think, even in second grade, that I can help my child anymore. And my teacher looked at her and she said, you might not be from this country and you might not speak the language, but you have power and your son has power. And ever since like that day, it lit a fire from my mom, and it set her up as like my biggest champion. So to this day, like my mom doesn't speak English, but every day like she knew all the way through high school whether I would give them my best effort or not, and she made sure that she let me know it. So for me, like I went from being an undocumented immigrant in this country to graduating from Stanford University, and it's because of my mother, and that's parent power to us. So for us, like when we think about, so for us, parent power is all about changing that power dynamic, right? It starts with home visits. Every single student and every single family at every single one of our schools gets a home visit every year. And our idea there is we want to shift the dynamic from parents in teachers' classrooms to teachers in students' homes, because that's how we get to really deeply know families on one level. On the second level, for us, we focus exclusively on elementary education. And I cannot tell you how many times I've had families come up to me and say, like, we want a middle school option. Can you open Rocket Ship to be middle school? Can you high school? And they're tough conversations, but like we're really transparent every single time. The answer is no. We're not going to do that because we are not about setting up a parallel system of education in this country. What we want to do is we want to transform our system of public education. And for us to do that, then that means we have to like trust our parents and put them in a position where they can advocate for themselves and for their schools. So really proud to say that because of our Rocket Ship families and community, we've opened 7,000 high quality middle school and high school options in San Jose. And for us, that's scale, that's scalability, where we like get to the point where we're impacting our public system of education. I think there's a former secretary of education, John King, said it really well. He said something to the effect of, in this country, we spend 98% of our philanthropic efforts for education on supply and only 2% on demand. And that's why we're not seeing a difference in equity. So for us at Rocket Ship, we believe in that demand, and we want to set up our families to demand the education that their students deserve.
That's awesome. And so I want to kick it to you, Brian, because you guys are at scale in a way that few in EdTech get to, and you're touching so many parents, right? And it takes a lot of effort and power and diligence, and thank Rocket Ship for doing what they do, but it's hard to do that at scale. So can you talk to us about what role technology plays in empowering parents at scale?
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to say that I tried to pull off the hotshot second grade thing too. But when your mom's a kindergarten teacher and your dad's a high school teacher in the district, it's hard to sneak that one by for at least a couple years. So well played for at least a couple years. So one of the ways that we think about the conversation and think about impact is 1 out of 5 high school freshmen won't graduate in 4 years with their class. And imagine a world where every one of those students had a champion. And so there's some obvious champions that we think about: teachers, coaches, counselors. But the most obvious champion is the parent. And we then go to the most extreme, which is in many cases that 1 out of 5 is probably correlated to parents that have a hard time staying connected to what's going on in that child's community. And so we think long and hard about how do we reach those hardest to reach families, the families that might have to work multiple jobs, the families that don't have the latest technology, don't have the latest smartphone, which is why we make it so that teachers can reach students and parents through SMS and text messaging, not just our mobile app. Why we focus so long and hard around translation so that they can reach students, but also parents that don't speak English, and make it so that they feel that they're connected to the community and to what's going on. Because I think the biggest variable success around having parents involved is just them knowing where their child is or isn't in that journey. So yeah, we're at scale, but I'd say the most important thing is that what we enable is a champion for the parents to be involved in a way where we have millions and millions of one-on-one relationships that are built through Remind every day. Teacher to student, student to parent, parent to teacher, student to student, right? We see them using Remind to create clubs and groups that are these micro communities that are another way for a student who might otherwise kind of head off the path and be one of those 1 out of 5, stay on. So yeah, technology is important, technology involves, but it's so much just about relationships, and that's the core of what Remind fosters.
And so you did that really through this two-way communication, right? Empowering parents to talk back to their schools and have those communications and meet them where they're at. And this probably, it just strikes me right now, is you're probably not used to not being the biggest on this stage, but Sam, at Great Schools, you reached many more parents through a different model, through a one-way communication model. Could you talk about the role technology plays there? What does it mean to build technology at scale? With a one-way communication, what are the challenges?
So I think we often think about sort of the tension. You can either go for scale and like a light touch intervention at scale, or go local and go deep. And like that, there's some balance between that you're going to sort of go for. And Great Schools is a really interesting and I think somewhat unique platform in that. What we did was we, for one, had a really clear use case that we were solving for, which is parents looking up information about their local schools. And the number one way in which, what do people do when they are looking for information? Where do we go for information? We go to Google. And so the primary way in which we reach parents at Great Schools is through Google. So parents are Googling some information, and what we have is high SEO, so we have high Google search ranks, and that led to where there's nearly 50 million annual users on the site. And the reason why we got to that scale, so that's half of all American families with school-age children are getting that information at least once throughout the year. So the reason why that exists is because we stood between parents and some essential information that they needed, and we provided that. That is, I think, there's a real role for consumer technology to help sort of these interventions scale, if you can think about things like SEO and use case design and whatnot. But at the same time, there's a real limitation to that, because what we do is we rely on somebody to first take the step of seeking that information out on their own. And so who are the parents that you are not reaching because they never even didn't take that step? So there's a lot of things that we did in terms of accessibility, designing mobile first, completely bilingual platform, not Google Translate, because we felt that wasn't, for Spanish, we did a full native translation in Spanish. It's more greater level of cultural competency. But again, it's not enough to just put it out there. And so I felt that on one hand, you have to think about distribution channels. How are you going to create smart channels that reach families, particularly harder to serve families, in actions that they're already taking? So an example is we did a study with some Columbia researchers that worked with a site called Go Section 8, which is where if you qualify for federal assistance housing subsidies, you can go on this site and look up what rental units in your area accepted your housing voucher. And so we then integrated Great Schools ratings into that search process. And that found this is a population where the average family income of 14,000, predominantly single moms, and found that intervention, which was a very low-cost information intervention done at scale, led those families to then move to places with higher performing schools, so having impact on a highly marginalized population because we thought about the distribution channel. So I think that is really critical. And the second thing is how are the tools that you build used in a really local context? Mm-hmm. So, all of this work, education is such a local endeavor. And so just putting this information out there, I mean, there's, on one level, we think about, okay, what's this, by putting better information out there, we can help people think a little bit differently about what's a quality choice. And try to impact, it's a very light touch intervention. For those 50 million people, it's a let's be honest, it's a very light touch. It is just, that's somebody who just went to a website one time. At that scale, can you maybe get those people to think a little bit differently? It's a light touch intervention, but at that scale, the impact can be significant. But at the same time, what are we doing to create these tools? We very much saw one of our users that we designed for was an advocate, a community organizer, somebody who's working in a community to help mobilize parents to realize their inherent power, but give them the tools to put pressure on the system to make the call for high quality schools. Because just giving out information about your school options doesn't do a lot of good if they're all low quality options. And so, but what is the role of that tool to help parents have that information? Information can help them access their power because it gives them the opportunity to go put pressure on the system. And so we've done a lot of work we've trained advocates in 20 cities on how to use this data in context of their community organizing, leading to the growth of more rocket ship type schools.
So I think if I could just jump in, it's
Yeah,
interesting
please.
The way Sam kind of talked about horizontal and depth. And I think one of the ways we think about it is why not have both? Mm-hmm. And so we have 31 million monthly active users, 2 million teachers, so more than half of the K-12 teachers in the US actively using Remind on a monthly basis. 29 million students and parents, pretty evenly split, about 15 million students, 14 million parents. But we also have 40% of those users are using us daily. So we have become this ingrained kind of daily use utility in the context of fostering that deep engagement. And then the thing that we're most excited about is we're opening this platform up, this communication platform up to include the learning services that are so actively used in these schools, whether it's Google Docs, Google Classroom, Microsoft, Canvas, Schoology, Sign Up Genius, Box, the list kind of goes on, where then that content that the teachers are using and are trying to engage so closely with the students also, guess what, makes its way to the parents. And the parents, we kind of joke that our lowest NPS happens to be with our students because guess what? The parents know what's going on. They know what's due. And teachers are brilliant. Teachers can send messages and schedule messages to go out at guess what time? Right around dinner time, where the students and the parents can be home together. And so you just see the power of this bringing students, teachers, and parents together. But again, it extends to equitable access. So the parent can know what's going on, even if they can't be together for dinner that night, and can still check in when they are together. Hey, I see you have an essay due on Friday, or I see you have a test coming up. And so the fact that we continue to think about how do we drive that engagement at the classroom level while still seeing us roll out very broadly and become essentially ubiquitous. I mean, we're in 80% of public schools with active users. We're in 90% of Title I schools with active users on Remind. And so we want to do both. We want to be ubiquitous horizontally, and we want to continue to kind of get world-class at what does that true family and parent engagement look like that we know is highly connected to and drives student success.
That's awesome. And so it's funny, we were just talking, I was just thinking that you have a way to measure what engagement looks like on your platform. Great Schools has the same. Well, Juan, we're going to talk about how you guys do it in Rocket Ship in a second. Who gets to decide what the goal is for family engagement, or parent empowerment or family engagement, whatever we want to call it? Is there somebody thinking about this at a broader level? Is there research standards being written?
Clearly very many people are thinking about how to best serve families. Before jumping into how we measure effectiveness and develop standards, I just want to piggyback, Brian, on your point, and Sam on one of your points. Distribution is absolutely everything with respect to driving equitable outcomes. Even within districts, even within schools, one must pay very close attention in terms of how we're implementing interventions to ensure that they get into the hands of all families. And then I would say, Brian, I totally agree with you that scale and depth of service are not mutually exclusive and totally achievable together. I think your platform is an excellent example of how that's currently being done. But there are additional ways to do it as well. Localization at scale is something that we're working on. We have our digital family engagement curriculums delivered via text messages, and we have tools for individual schools, districts, and Head Starts to tailor the curriculum to their unique context. And I would say even more exciting is personalized learning. We're also working on an extension that draws on child formative assessment data. It communicates that data to parents along with tips targeted to their developmental levels, which we have found to be 50% more effective than sending general notifications through an RCT we ran in San Francisco Unified School District. But I digress to answer your question, how do we measure effectiveness? So I think my answer might surprise you because I have almost a decade of causal inference training, which means I like run experiments, and nothing but an experiment is good, at least in the academy. But I actually disagree with that. There are multiple ways to measure effectiveness. Of course, the first and the strongest evidence is through academic research, and in particular randomized controlled trials. And I'm happy to report that the number of rigorous evaluation of tech-enabled parenting supports is rapidly on the rise. We have 3 RCTs on our underlying program alone, as well as multiple ongoing and several in the pipe, and we're not alone. There's a whole set of researchers focused on studying these very issues. Peter Bergman at Columbia is probably who you were referring to. He's one of about a dozen. Todd Rogers at Harvard and Ariel Khalil at Chicago are 2 others. So the evidence is rapidly growing, and I would also say that there's increased interest in providing capital to scale these interventions. We're one such example. We were sort of born out of an academic enterprise. But academic research is just one way to measure effectiveness. Local evaluation is also incredibly important to gauge how interventions work in differing local contexts, which academic research can but doesn't always do. We work with our partners, providing them with guidance and the tools to analyze their data to gauge how our program's working. And I would say we've got several in the queue, and we're a much smaller company than Brian's company, though we have 175,000 families that we serve, which shouldn't be underestimated. As technology tools grow over time, I only expect the number of local evaluations to increase because educational institutions require to know how interventions are working in their settings, which is absolutely wonderful. A third way, we, like I think most organizations like us, intensively survey and conduct focus groups with families to see how our programs are working and to innovate on our programs. This often goes underreported or not reported at all, but it is a key sort of behind the scenes activity. And then finally, I'd say social proof. We don't need an RCT to know that Facebook and Twitter are changing not just individual but social outcomes. I think Brian's intervention, if I can call it that, is maybe a more positive instance of social proof. But the virality and the extent to which parents, teachers, and children use your intervention just sort of make it clear that you're having an impact. In terms of standards, it sort of varies by age of child development. From birth to 3, organizations like the CDC and even Baby Center do a really nice job at communicating developmental milestones. In preschool, the Head Start Parent, Family, and Community Engagement Framework is excellent. The Strengthening Families' Protective Factors, State Early Learning Standards, and QRIS standards add important information. And then I'd say at the K-12 level, Title I does a nice job of describing how schools can support families and ultimately child development. And then a couple of, I guess one big burgeoning initiative that is interesting to monitor the National Association of Family, School, and Community Engagement, in partnership with, let's see if I can say this right, it's always hard to say. In fact, I'm going to need to refer to my notes just to be able to say it. The Council of Chief State School Officers is working with multiple state consortia to create family engagement standards that we're all excited to see. And I'm really just scratching the surface, but I think that the question identifies a problem in that communication isn't broadly communicated, and that's in fact what we're sort of custom built to do, is to hack standards, communicate them to families, along with tips that they can act on that build on existing family.
And in the meantime, we're all trying to do some form of parent engagement that we in our own products are feeling like are doing the job that we need to do. And Juan, you guys have developed methodology for empowering parents and dealing with them, and sort of you have goals for how many times you talk to parents and all of these things. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we look at it as if it matters, it gets measured. If it doesn't matter, then it doesn't. And parent power, parent advocacy, parent engagement in our school absolutely matters. So we do a couple different things. One is we measure our home visits, 100% goal every single year. At this point, I'm proud to say we have visited the homes of 613 Rocketeers at my school. We go after parent partnership hours. So every year at the beginning of the year, parents sign a commitment to engage for 20 hours at every school, and just if they don't do it, like nothing actually happens, right? Like there's just whispering it a little bit, nothing actually happens. But for us, it's like super strong feedback on like how we're engaging families, because there's such a variety of ways for parents to be able to plug in. Last year, we were at 85%. We currently have an average of about 27 hours per family, and we're around the 60% range with about 2 months left in the school year. And the third thing that we measure is we have an explicit parent feedback survey that happens at each of our schools. And there's a net promoter style kind of question, and it's something like have you recommended Rocket Chip? Not would you recommend Rocket Chip? Have you recommended Rocket Chip? And we're currently at about 90% on that.
That's fantastic.
Sam made an important point about translation and communication, and so hearing how much you invested in bilingual and Spanish, and yes, Google Translation has a long way to go. And part of what we're trying to do to help measure reaching parents is going back into our relationships with schools and districts and the school information system, and then seeing what language is preferred and having that trigger our communications going out in those native languages in the right way, but also simplifying the way that they can measure, are they reaching everybody? It's a very simple measure, is are they reaching everybody in their community? Because the school information systems oftentimes has very archaic, old, out-of-date contact information. And in a lot of cases, when they then use Remind to send out a district message, we show them, here's who you reached, here are the errors. You get to go in and now find out how do you actually reach those families, and that's a vast improvement over keeping score on how many people came to back to school night. Not that that isn't an important metric as well, but there's other ways to make sure you're reaching everybody, particularly for those people that, again, can't make it to back to school night.
Yeah, I mean, and I think this model of really reinventing what parent empowerment looks like in order to what works for families, as opposed to this more old school model of, as the school, we want parents to be involved, we used to call it parent involvement. How much are parents involved in our schools? Are they coming to the after school night? Are they coming up? Are they volunteering in the school? With really very little thinking about how does that work within the lives of families. And so this model is still, I mean, it's light years away ahead of where so many schools are, but the having tools that exist at the scale now, I think it stands to change how we think about moving from parent involvement to parent engagement to parent empowerment, and what does that really look like?
Yeah, there's a lot of teacher feedback came and said one of the most challenging pieces for them to reach parents is when they have to make a call to a parent. And the way that is done traditionally is they go to the school office and find the landline phone and then call on the landline to, unfortunately, a phone number that's in the SIS that might be another landline, and guess what? They don't reach the parent. So that's why we built voice calling into our app. Right. So they can make calls, their number is masked, but they can reach the parent where the parent is with a number that they know they have, and can have sometimes those very hard but crucial and important conversations that are about parent engagement and parent involvement.
Excellent. I mean, to me, this entire conversation about empowering parents as educators and advocates, I'll add, is fundamentally about equity, about equitable outcomes for all parents, about creating products and pathways to reach 100% of parents, regardless of where they are, what their conditions are, what language they speak. Like my mother, who would have been involved, but was never empowered to do so. So I feel, like me, that you guys feel a little bit better that there's a lot of people working on this, and we, like me, I'm trying to figure out how I can help every single one of these people do their work even better. So please join me in a round of applause.